Tonight on Free Minds TV, we'll be talking about a corrupt sheriff. We'll also be talking about a sign in the UK that police deem to be racist. The governor of California vetoes a smoking ban in state parks and state beaches. That plus more, all coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to episode 157 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. It is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, Nick, we have a lot to be getting into tonight. We are going to be talking about a corrupt sheriff in a couple moments. We'll also be going into some of the world of cosmetology and just what it takes to become a licensed cosmetologist, if you don't want to.
Just one of the many things that you have to be licensed to do,
yes.
At least in many places.
Yes, should you pay $15,000 and thousands of hours to get your license to braid hair? We'll be talking about that and a whole lot more, as well as going over to the UK and talking about some of their silliness. But first, as I mentioned, I did want to talk about one particular corrupt sheriff. There are a lot of them out there, but this one that I'm going to be talking about comes from South Carolina and has been accused of selling drugs out of the back of his squad car, or I guess squad SUV, for a number of years. And they weren't even his drugs. He stole them from drug dealers. Yes, the South Carolina sheriff dealt drugs from a police SUV, and when state and federal agents gave him a list of possible drug dealers in his county, he immediately started calling them to tip them off and to extort money from them, or get them off the list. The FBI taped the Lee County Sheriff, E.J. Melvin, starting in March, and caught him saying that he was going to arrange a traffic stop on a drug dealer and take some of the cocaine he expected to find, and then use the rest as evidence. Apparently, he's been doing this for a number of years. They say that there's evidence dating back all the way to 2006, when he was dealing drugs out of the back of his police-issued SUV. Yes, it looks like there's mounting evidence that he was pulling people over, taking some of their drugs, arresting them some of the time, extorting money some other parts of the time, and then selling the rest of the money. Now, Nick, is this an isolated incident? Oh, yes. Oh, well, yeah. Well, money and drugs. I mean, you have to launder money and sell the money.
That's true.
He was doing both, because he's laundering the money that he takes or extorts from them and selling the drugs as well. So he's doing both here. At least that's what he's being accused of doing, and I guess there's a number of taped conversations with the FBI saying that he's doing this. You know, he was particularly lucky because as the sheriff, the FBI was feeding him tips on where the drugs were. Then he'd go and raid them and take some of the drugs, sometimes just extort them, sometimes get them off the list and buddy up with them. This is going on for years, allegedly.
Well, you can make a lot more money stealing drugs from drug dealers and then reselling it, or just extorting money from drug dealers.
What's a sheriff make anyways? I don't
Probably not that much. I mean, obviously it varies by county and by state, but not a whole lot.
So if he could make,
we're talking six figures in many cases.
He could make in a week what he would make in
a
lifetime.
He could make millions of dollars doing this, and that's one of the problems why you see so much corruption on police forces, is because of, namely, the war on drugs and some of the other vice crimes that are enforced, because there's just so much money to be made there that, well, it's hard for a lot of people to resist the ability to simply take some of that money or some of those drugs, rather than putting them into evidence, only declare, I don't know, 4 ounces of cocaine instead of 8. Right. No one's going to know the difference.
Of course they would.
Unless you're under investigation by the federal police.
And I guess eventually it caught up with him, but that doesn't mean that they're catching everyone, Nick. They're never going to, and this is one of the reasons why it's time to end the war on drugs, is because, well, you get a lot of corrupt police officers out of it. Now, I'm not saying they're all corrupt, but there's a bunch of them that are, and there's no telling how many and which ones. I mean, we've talked, not on the TV show because we don't take calls anymore, but on the radio show we've had ex-police officers call up numerous times and say that the corruption just rises through the ranks.
We've gotten a lot. I think we recently got an email from a former police officer in the state of New Hampshire, and we get them quite frequently. And the story is pretty consistent. I mean, there's no way we can verify that every single person who emails us or calls us and claims to be a former law enforcement officer, there's no way we actually can verify that everybody who's doing that, in fact, is. I'd be very surprised if every single person who was claiming to be a former law enforcement officer was lying. And pretty much every time we talk to somebody who used to be on a police force, for the most part, they agree with us.
Well, it's obvious, Nick. I mean, police officers are people too, right? So if you could make in a week or a night what you would make in your entire lifetime as a police officer, it's hard to say no to that. And chances are you're not going to get caught for it. Most of the time,
just like most
they're not getting
professional
caught.
drug dealers don't get caught.
They don't get caught. So it's so tempting.
At least not the first time.
There's
you might
so
get
much
caught
money
on
involved.
the thousands deal you do, but the first 999, you're probably not going to get caught.
Right, and a lot of them would probably get in and then get out, the smart ones anyways, and before they get caught. But it's just one more reason to end the war on drugs. The goal, Nixon said, of the war on drugs was to completely eradicate drugs from America, from the United States, right? Clearly, that is impossible. So it's time to go into harm reduction mode, Nick. Harm reduction mode means you do the least harm to society and to the American people. We're not trying to lock every single person up or who's ever made a mistake with this. It's time to take the profit motives, the corruption motives, out of the police force, out of the hands of criminals and drug dealers, and treat people who are addicted to harmful substances or any drug the way they should be treated, as medical patients.
And part of the harm that is done to society today with the war on drugs model we have is the law enforcement aspect itself. I mean, if you consider the sheer cost of hiring all the extra police officers, when you think about the number of people who are arrested every year, what is it, about 300,000 arrests for marijuana every year?
Arrests? I mean, there's 1.5 million arrests for drugs. I think 800,000 of them were last year were marijuana related.
And we have in the United States, we have the largest prison population of any country in the world.
Yep.
So when you consider the amount of money that is spent keeping people incarcerated for non-violent drug-related offenses, the amount of money that is spent hiring police officers who are needed because there is a war on drugs going, even just the DEA itself, one agency that is completely devoted to enforcing the war on drugs. Think about hiring all of those people, all of the equipment that's required, all of the pensions that end up getting paid, and all of the other government benefits that taxpayers are forced to foot the bill for.
Oh, it really does start to add up, not to mention the corruption side of things, Nick. It's interesting, and that's only for the non-violent ones, the ones you were quoting, the people who are arrested for actual drug crimes. How about the ones who are in jail because, I don't know, they have a habit for, let's say, crack cocaine, for example. Something that should be very cheap, no more expensive than a pack of cigarettes for, I don't know, a few days' worth of your crack cocaine habit. Except for the war on drugs is inflating the prices.
Wow.
So rather than being able to go and supply their drug habit until they can get help, they're having to knock over convenience stores, break into people's houses. It's really interesting. Brad Jardis, former New Hampshire police officer, who's since dropped out and started fighting in this liberty movement, has been posting a number of articles up to freekeene.com recently talking about some of the violent or break-ins, violent offenders or burglars and break-ins that are going on here in New Hampshire, and pointing to the fact, well, these wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for the war on drugs. The cost to society is not only the corruption in the police force and the cost to hiring officers and the cost to locking people up behind jail. It also causes people to break into houses, to break into convenience stores, to rob banks. I mean, these bank robberies that are going down, you look at the kids who are robbing banks, 19, 20, 24 years old, you think they're doing this because it's the only way to get rich? No, chances are they're fueling a drug habit, one that shouldn't be costing them this much money, one that shouldn't be inflated thousands and thousands of percentage points. It should be something like smoking. Horrible for you, but a personal choice. You don't need to rob old grandmas and rob banks because of a smoking habit or a drinking habit, because you can go to the convenience store and buy those things. We don't need to rob people to supply a nicotine
a lot of the
habit.
violence and the other crimes against property and crimes against people that are associated with the war on drugs, a lot of that isn't even just on the user's end. A lot of the actual violence that you see surrounding the war on drugs comes about the distribution. There are a lot of drug dealers out there, and they're the ones who are making serious money off of the war on drugs. So especially when you get up to the higher levels. So that's where you often see people getting killed over drug turf, people being robbed and or murdered in drug deals that go bad. So a lot of the violent deaths that you see associated with the war on drugs, and a lot of the criminal gangs that are out there. A lot of the criminal gangs that are in many of the major cities in the US, the principal way that they make money is selling drugs and fighting with other gangs about who gets to sell the drugs and where.
Right.
and a lot of people die as a result. A lot of the homicide problem that we have in the United States is related to either gangs or the war on drugs.
Right. It's impossible to really estimate how many people are in jail because of the war on drugs, but I mean, we don't need to be the world's largest imprisoner. Just don't need to. We're supposed to be the freest country.
More than Red China.
Anyways, if you have a different opinion what we should do about the war on drugs, we'd love to hear it. We really love dissenting opinions. I haven't gotten one besides someone who's invested in it, say they work in a prison or something, or they are a police officer who's is all for the war on drugs because, well, that's how they're making their living by arresting drug dealers.
There would still be police if there wasn't a war on drugs.
They'd be going after real criminals, though. But
and you might not need as many of them as the other
God,
thing.
no.
Which is one of the reasons, in my opinion, why the police officers' unions around the country always seem to lobby against doing away with the war on drugs. Well, when you think about it, it is job security.
Right. I would like a dissenting opinion, though, from someone. Give an argument for why we're continuing this war on drugs. Is it really worth the cost to society? fmtv@freemindsmedia.org is the email, or log on to our website, freemindstv.org, and from there you can just click on the contact link. I'd really love to hear it. A well-thought argument, because I haven't heard a well-thought one besides, well, it's essentially a job maker. It fuels jobs. It helps out the industrial prison complex, and has plenty of new squad cars and those armored tanks and all that fun stuff, right? Besides that argument, I really haven't heard one, and it's a weak argument at best. All right, Nick, we do need to move along, though. We've got our problems here in the United States, but they've definitely also got them over in the UK, so it's important to swim across the ocean every now and then and point out some of the silliness that goes on there. I haven't even seen this. Maybe this is legit. Is it silly? Is it legit?
No,
it's coming from the UK, so it's probably silly.
Well, it's sort of silly. It's also sort of chilling if you think about the fact that you really don't have a right to free speech in the United Kingdom. A pensioner who put up a red, white, and blue election poster telling voters to kick out MPs was accused of racism by police and actually threatened with arrest, according to the article. After being inundated by canvassing politicians, Roy Newman, 74, decided to tell other voters with a sign, "Get the lot out." But 90 minutes after he put up the homemade sign, police arrived and threatened to arrest him. Police were saying that the Union Jack colored lettering, which the British flag is also red, white, and blue, could be construed as racist. So apparently people were misinterpreting the sign, which, granted, was fairly vague, saying, "Get the lot out." It was meant to mean, let's kick all of the MPs out of Parliament, let's get rid of our councillors. Basically the same as here in the United States. There are a lot of people who would like to see the entire Congress kicked out of office. Well, that was the same message that Roy Newman was trying to get across, but some people thought that it might have racist connotations like get the minorities out of England. So after a while, basically he finally agreed, the homeowner here with the sign, finally agreed to change the coloring on a couple of the letters. He put some yellow in there, but refused to change the wording. Because it's illegal to put up a poster that could be, I guess I should backtrack. It is illegal to put up a poster that could be construed as racist in the UK.
Why?
You're not allowed to offend people.
Why?
Political correctness. It's illegal to say things that are offensive. Because in the UK, there is no First Amendment. There is no Bill of Rights, so you have no right to free speech. And so politicians have decided there are certain things you can't say.
They still want to do it. They're all about this. They're supporting this, Nick. I'm so baffled by this still. It's having. I know we've been reporting on multiple stories about this.
Well,
coming from the UK, where they're prosecuting people for saying things that could be mean.
It's not uncommon around the world.
It seems so weird to me, so foreign. I guess it is foreign concept.
In most countries, there's no Bill of Rights that actually restrains government and to some extent the mass of the people and protects unpopular speech.
And the people like this. The people are all about locking people up who say mean things.
Unpopular things.
Unpopular things.
Obviously,
okay. So the majority
most people
don't
like people saying unpopular things. I certainly don't like what the KKK says at their rallies, but here in the United States, we're in a position where it's not uncommon to say, I disagree with what somebody says very strongly, but I believe that they have a right to say it. In most places around the world, you don't have a right to say what's on your mind if the government doesn't like it.
Well, if it's your own property, you should be able to paint up whatever sign you want, and people don't like it, well, they should stop knocking on your door. If you're putting up racist signs on your building, well, you shouldn't have many friends, right? Ostracism seems to work for most people.
Here in the U.S., the zoning board or something would probably come after you for putting up a sign Not because of what it says, but because of
depending
the
on where you live. Yeah, you're right. Anyway, so there's problems everywhere, Nick. I mean, there's no property rights anymore, it seems, or at least they're diminishing rather quickly. But if you have different thoughts, fmtv@freemindsmedia.org. I'd like to invite people to log on to our website, freemindsmedia.org, and from there, there's a chip-in page right at the top of the page there, Nick. That chip-in page is trying to raise $300. We're 9% of the way there so far. We still have 91% to go, though. We need everybody who enjoys the show to go on there and donate $1 or $2. It doesn't take much time, really doesn't cost you much more than, say, oh, I don't know, a cup of coffee. You've been watching this show for a while. You like the show. Well, we need your help right now. Go on there. Chip $1 into whatever you can afford. Not only are you going to be supporting the show and creating a real backdrop down here, back here, so it'll really look professional, get us more viewers, but you're also going to get Nick to drink a shot of hot sauce live on the air as soon as we reach our goal. So it could be next show if someone drops another, I don't know, I
guess if people really don't like me,
$200 and something dollars.
Maybe I really annoy you when I do the show.
So donate for that purpose.
Donate some money because you're going to see me experience some pain.
That's right. So not only will you be helping the show, but you'll also be getting to see Nick drink some hot sauce and make the show look better, get us on more stations. freemindsmedia.org, and chip in whatever amount you can afford. Even if it's $1, there's thousands of you guys watching. If just a handful, 10% of people chipped in $1, we'd have no financial problems at all whatsoever. So if you enjoy the show, go on and do it. All right, when we come back, we are going to be getting into all sorts of exciting stories, including braiding hair. How much should you have to pay for the license? And how many hours of training do you really need to braid someone's hair, Nick? Stay tuned. This is Free Minds TV.
This is Glenn Jacobs, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. It is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, Nick. Got to get into a couple of different stories here. We are going to be going over to California, where there's actually a little bit of good news for people who enjoy freedom or for smokers out there. They didn't go completely totalitarian. But first, we're going to be getting into a story about cosmetology and braiding hair. Yes, this story is coming from Chicago, but really this is happening everywhere, whether it's a big city you live in or a small town you live in. Chances are there's some kind of regulations being put on people for whether they can cut hair, braid hair, wash fingernails, clip fingernails, paint fingernails, you know, all that stuff. States really want to meddle in there, and this goes for whatever it is, whether it's an electrician or a home builder, whatever. There's always these silly little rules and restrictions to get into them. But one that really points it out is the art of braiding hair. How much training and how much schooling does one need if they're going to be braiding someone's hair? Well, I say, well, if they know how to braid someone's hair, they should, and people want to have their hair braided by them, two adults making a transaction, that's it. The state should completely stay out of it. Why does the state need to say, well, they didn't go through the proper licensing? They shouldn't. I mean, if you're an adult and you want to braid someone's hair and another adult is willing to pay you to braid their hair, well, who cares? Or it's a state business. Well, Chicago, Illinois, reporting. Amnu Waig has been braiding hair in Chicago for more than a decade, carrying on a tradition passed down from generations in her native Senegal. To braiders, her talent for weaving women's hair into elaborate styles isn't just a livelihood, it's a form of art. But this artist will not be able to perform her art unless she goes to school at a cost of at least $15,000 and 1,500 hours of training, then apply for a license, pay a fee, and then she can open up a business. But wait a minute, Nick, she's been braiding hair for 10 years already. She did it regardless of having a license, and people were happy. She has a huge customer base. What's the issue here?
The issue is that the state didn't get their money. And they don't have control over her business.
Yes, those
are really the two driving forces behind licensure.
I've got a third.
Okay.
There are nearly 63,000 licensed cosmetologists in Illinois. And most of the complaints that come down to the Department of Financial and Professional Regulations, Nick, most of those complaints, guess who they come from?
Other licensees.
Other licensees. People who went through and jumped through the hoops. People who went through $50,000 worth of schooling and thousands of hours of learning how to braid someone's hair and paid the licensure. They're the ones who want to keep this alive because it's protectionism. There's no difference between this and paying off the mafia to kick the other guy off the block. I don't know how many people have watched Sopranos, but there's a bunch of these things where, well, this guy's, the mafia essentially kicks off or kills the people who don't pay them off to be able to mow someone's lawn. There's no difference between this, Nick. There really is very little besides these ones an elected form of government. Is that it? What's the difference?
Basically,
you pay someone off to keep the competition out.
Right. I mean, that's largely, the argument that's made by people who are proponents of licensure is usually that it protects the public, blah, 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 blah. Quite often, it doesn't. Just because somebody does have a license doesn't mean they know what they're doing. In reality, it's largely because the government wants money and control, and licensees, people who do want to play ball with the government in order to do business, well, they are protected. There are a lot of fields that you get into that the government requires a license
Almost
for.
all fields, Nick. I mean, we've reported on stories where businesses want little kids who are running lemonade stands kicked off the block because some business owner doesn't like it because they don't have their license to sell lemonade.
That's what it does. Existing businesses, what it does is it raises the barrier for entry into the marketplace, makes it more difficult for startups, especially when businesses are first getting going. They're often they don't have a lot of money. They're not well capitalized. So it keeps the competition out.
It's time for people
you don't have
to
all
get
these
over
little
it.
fish
Now,
taking your
speaking
profits
of
away
this,
from
I
you.
know last week we were talking about some civil disobedience, especially that's going on here in New Hampshire, and how well is it making a real difference. I remember back a few years back, when there was an unlicensed manicurist, one of the first civil disobedience arrests here in New Hampshire, actually made a huge difference. This guy who was doing manicures, painting people's nails. He went outside the State House and charged someone $1 to paint their fingernails. The police came and arrested him. Shortly after that, the New Hampshire legislature passed a law reducing the hours from like 1,500 to something like 850. So it did do a little bit to reduce it here in New Hampshire, but it didn't take it all away. You still have to go out to all sorts of school and get licensed and jump through hoops too. So I guess there's a little bit of good news coming from that with some civil disobedience there here in New Hampshire. But this is going on everywhere, not only probably in the United States, but all over the world. I mean, my brother, he's currently in Africa doing work over there, and he said there's really absolutely no difference between jumping through the hoops here and the ones in Africa, except Africa, it's probably cheaper and much faster, less bureaucratic. I mean,
just pay a bribe.
You just pay a bribe over in Africa, but in Africa it's easier because you just take out the money and it's a smaller bribe. Here it's $15,000 and 1,500 hours plus licensee fees and probably zoning boards and all this other stuff. And the only difference in Africa is, well, it's a gang that says, yeah, we're a gang, we'll take the money and then you can do business here. That's the only difference. The United States government, because they've got their seals and their official flags and stuff, then we're not a gang anymore because we've got a seal, Nick, and we've got a flag. And no, what's the difference between them and a gang?
The actions are effectively the same.
Yeah.
Except the government will tell you that they do it for your own good.
Yes, because
the gang doesn't
they say that
about the fact that they do it
need
for
to
their money.
protect the consumer's rights, because what if there's a complaint, Nick? Well, that person who braids hair probably won't get much more business.
Yeah, don't go back to them. Yeah. I mean, if you want to have the option of knowing that people are licensed, by all means, have voluntary licensure.
Oh, yeah.
Or have free market associations.
There's plenty of those.
There are plenty
Underwriter
of those.
laboratories. I mean,
Right.
look under your toaster.
Right.
See whose stamp of approval
You can have
is on
an
it.
association of cosmetologists who have certain standards.
Mm-hmm.
And that way the public knows if somebody's actually part of that
fine.
association.
Not to
then they're all
mention,
set.
Nick, I've gotten haircuts I didn't like before. I've gotten some great haircuts too. Now my wife cuts them. I hope I don't get in trouble. But I've gotten a couple haircuts I wasn't pleased before, and the fact that that person was licensed made no difference.
No.
I just went to different hair.
See, that's the thing, is the license doesn't really protect you all that
No, it
much.
doesn't. It protects existing businesses and gives the government ways to collect money and ways to regulate people. Anyways, we do need to move on. A teeny piece of good news with all this bad news coming down. We need to talk about the smoking bans that have been going on in California. Now, these are going on all over the United States. Back in the 70s when they banned smoking on airplanes, I was reading some of the old articles, and it was amazing some of the backlash they were getting. People could never fathom back then that when they banned smoking on airplanes, it would get to the point where in some cities across the United States, you're not allowed to smoke anywhere in public, outdoors, at all. In some local cities. In some places in California, you can't even smoke in your own house if it's a duplex. But at least it's local. There have been some pushes, though, to make it a statewide initiative, to say ban smoking on beaches and in parks. I know that they've done it in Maine. There was the one to do it in California, blanket across the entire state, but I guess Mr. Arnold says no.
Yeah. The governor has vetoed a proposed ban for California state parks and beaches. A lot of proponents of this ban are very disappointed, and they go on and complain in this article. But the governor really didn't like the idea of telling Californians that they couldn't smoke in these public places. There's something inherently uncomfortable about the idea of the state encroaching in such a broad manner on the people of California, Schwarzenegger said. And he actually put up a smoking tent outside of the state capitol.
Good for him.
Schwarzenegger smokes cigars.
He does. He's an avid cigar smoker. Good for him, though, Nick, because, I mean, it just seems like their freedoms are disappearing very, very quickly. I mean, there's some towns in California that really do ban smoking in your own house even if you own it, if it's connected to another residence. So even if the other resident smokes.
Property rights aren't what they used to be. This used to be a free country.
Yeah, it's just
and
ridiculous.
If they can ban smoking because people find it objectionable, what's to stop them from saying you can't eat meat in your own house? Or
the proponents for this ban,
professional wrestling. I don't find that particularly great, but
reading what some of the nanny staters, the whiners in there, the people who say, oh, but we need it. They're saying the reason they need this ban is because of the cigarette butts that people leave on the beaches, all the litter. They can't have that, so they need to ban it. You know how much litter is out there from, I don't know, Wendy's bags, McDonald's, all this other stuff all over the place, all over the streets, all over beaches, glass bottles, beer. It's everywhere. You're going to just start banning products because people litter it? That's backwards thinking.
When I go to the beach, the cigarette butts are not the litter I notice. Usually it's like the medical
condoms,
waste.
The needles, the stuff that's rolling up on shore.
I've seen medical waste literally rolling back onto shore, not to mention, like you said, beer cans.
Or, I don't know, say an oil slick.
Yeah, that too.
I mean, there's worse things to worry about.
Plastic island in the middle of the Pacific from all the trash that largely Americans just dumped everywhere and it washed out into the ocean. Yeah. There's thousands of tons of garbage swirling around in the middle of the Pacific, and you think this smoking ban is going to make it?
How about this? You care so much about people littering their cigarette butts, walk around the beach, and every time you see someone throw a cigarette butt on the ground, make a huge stink about it. Follow them around with a camera, put them up on YouTube or something. This person's a litterer. Ostracize them if you're so enthused about this. And you're right, cigarette butts, littering it, disgusting, horrible. But it doesn't mean you need to ban it because of that. Blanket anti-freedoms. Anyways, we're completely out of time for this week. Remember, chip in to make him drink hot sauce, make us get a sweet set, freemindsmedia.org. Join us this Sunday and every Sunday for Free Minds Radio, 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. All up at freemindsmedia.org. Until then, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good one.